That's
Okay.
what I was looking for. Those three
Recording.
you see at the bottom there on the right.
You can zoom in. Yeah, it'll zoom in. Oh. Good. Yeah.
Okay, let's see if we can wrap this up by 4:15.
Good idea.
With just a few of us, it will be a lot quicker. How's the sound levels at the back there?
Okay. Good. You'll sit right in front.
I think it's just
When graphics cannot compare, you're saying that the computer cannot do it for you, right? Because when you can just check on all the different sites and come up with a list and then compare yourself on your own. Is that what? And I was trying to understand what your language said cannot compare.
Okay, we can talk about it. It's more of
Let's start with B, because all the other points come in afterwards.
Okay.
Because that's kind of nitty-gritty. But the whole point really here is looking at the overview of what's the purpose of the data and who's going to manage it, basically. So what I'm going to show you first is how other groups manage the data. Okay, so first up, from the UK, there are a number of different scaled operations. There's national level and then county level. And for the moths, they usually do from the recorder, wherever that is, in whichever county. Let's assume Singapore equates to a UK county. With the number of people involved, that's quite a good parallel. And there's one person with a lot of knowledge from previous recording who's designated as a recorder for that county. And that person then reports on all unusual records to a national network. And he also is quality control for all data for national. So they act as a filter from local through county to national. Now here, you've got one less step. That county recorder is in effect the national quality control. So some examples for you. Let's find the right one. For Warwickshire, that's right in the middle of the UK. It's where I started doing my moth work 20-something, nearly 30 years ago. They have a slightly different system. They have a recorder for macros and for micros, the small stuff and the big stuff. Simply because with so many species, if one person's doing it, often there isn't enough capability, because so many records are generated every year, for that one person to overview everything. Now, they do on an annual basis provide a report that summarizes all of the data seen each year by all of the recorders. And they've done that for 30-something years. Yep. And more recently, they've actually written up every single meeting up to 2015. They've still got some stuff to upload. But for each one, there's a spreadsheet for each event, as well as an annual summary that brings out the highlights, things like new county records, unusual species or rare species, or biodiversity action plan species, for example. Now in Singapore, you have a BSAP. And that BSAP should be one of the guiding principles that determines what you are going to do in terms of moth recording. It should be highlighting what needs to be done. And it may simply say, we don't have any data, so go out and record and report it back. So one of the things everybody needs to sit around and talk about is the biodiversity strategy and action plan for Singapore. That's the first critical document you have to consult. And that's a government thing. They're in charge of maintaining BSAP, but they should also be collaborating with all stakeholders. NSS is a key stakeholder for all biological data. If they don't consult NSS, there's something wrong going on. So Your homework is to find out where NSS supports the government on BSAP, how it can assist. And the moths is one component only of that. What you do need to check is if there is anything talking about invertebrate data in BSAP, and then help fill or tick the boxes for the government. And you can do that by providing reports in the same way this has been put together, event by event, just like we will have to provide a report in parts on the event we do tomorrow night. And then at the end of the year, you can provide a summary. Well, we had some really good nights. Some nights where exciting stuff happened, some nights where it was dross. And then you can write a little bit more about that. Maybe a summary table saying X number of specimens were collected and deposited at NUS. Or X number of material had been worked at NUS, or X number of species have been described in such and such journal.
Do they do systemic study, or they are just randomly collecting record and submit?
They target according to their local BSAP. And for most things, each event will have a key species or a key suite of species that they are trying to monitor. So sometimes they'll go back, let's say, to Windmill Hill 3 or 4 times a year because they're doing site-based work that's prescribed by their BSAP. Or maybe they go to, let's say, Alcote Wood once or twice in a particular time of year to monitor a rare or threatened species to see whether it's doing well or not well in that particular year. But because they're doing lots of sites over the year, they have a much better understanding of what the year is doing generally, how species are responding to the particular weather events that year. Never mind the climate. You know what the climate's like. But you might get particular haze events in Singapore, or you might get particular long periods without rain, or particular periods over a long time with rain that might cause perturbations in the observations on a year-on-year basis. So short-term monitoring is geared to short-term BSAP. Long-term monitoring looks at the trends that BSAP is trying to identify. So there are 2 components to BSAP. Short-term, yes, no, presence, absence. Long-term, trend. Is it getting better? Is it getting worse? Do we really need to do something about it? Or is it doing all right without too much intervention? Now in Singapore, intervention probably will be necessary for many species in the long run. But at the moment, we don't know which. Just as we don't in Hong Kong, because there's not enough baseline data. So I suspect the first thing we're going to need to establish is a baseline. What have you got? Do you know how many? Do you have viable populations? If not, why not? The answer is probably going to be habitat fragmentation. So those are some of the key areas that should be being addressed by BSAP that you can help with. And that's one approach that has been taking place already in the UK for 25 years. Because the UK enacted the Rio Convention almost immediately. And so they got on with it. I was involved in drafting the first BSAPs for Suffolk in 1994. And they're still doing that now. They're revising every 5 years as they are supposed to. Hong Kong has only just finished publishing its first BSAP. It's 20 years behind. Singapore published its first BSAP about a decade ago. So you should be on the 2nd or 3rd revision by now. But you do need to be involved. It's a stakeholder and a government thing. If you're not involved, get involved. Because that should be the guiding principle that NParks should be saying, yes, please come and help. But we don't know how to help. Then look to the BSAP and look to IUCN and look to the Rio Convention. Those 2 particular components dovetail each other. IUCN gives you the means to measure how species are doing. The Rio Convention, through the various conference of parties that follow every few years, gives you the framework within which you operate. Okay, so let me show you, first of all, IUCN. Keep the Darwin collar up. IUCN has been going on a long, long time. It's the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. And this is basically a tool that looks at both habitat and species, not just species. Most people think it's only about species, but there is also a habitat criteria that should be investigated and understood as well, that allow a ranking system for degree of threat that goes from least concern through to extinct. Now, I'm not going to go through this now. I'm not going to go through it probably on Sunday afternoon. That depends how much time we have. But for you guys, it's important to know about this. And this website gives you all the information you need, particularly through the resources, classification schemes, data organization, information sources and quality. All the key components to make your data usable.
We see some moth specimens.
Okay, let me put in. There are some species of Hypena in the Pacific that have gone. They're up there. So there's the Laysan Hypena that's gone. There's another one that's gone from Hawaii. And you click on each species, it will give you what the species name is, a relevant link, that's a permanent link, and then beneath it, it gives you a summary, what it is. That's out of date, by the way, it should be Erebidi now. Its vernacular name and how it was assessed, and over what point in time it's been assessed. And then where, a range map, if it's still in extent, so something that's still around, you can click the range map and find out where it is. Then there's a little bit about habitat, if they know about it. And eventually you'll end up with a bit more. So let's do something else. Different example, not necessarily a moth one.
That one is endemic to Hawaii.
It was endemic to Hawaii, yes, before it went bye-bye. Long time ago. We know that one's gone.
But I think with moth, it's not as well studied, right? So
Correct.
potentially it could still be around, not like other species where it's very visible.
Some of these Pacific islands they have studied very well, so they do know with a fair degree of certainty that they're gone because they knew what the habitat was. People have gone looking for it. There are still regular surveys ongoing for these species.
I'm thinking more of outside of that region where the land starts to split off.
Yeah.
Actually, it could be in another place that we may not know it
Yeah.
exists. Just because it's unlike other, insect that's not so well studied.
This one is likely to have been, like many of the Galapagos finches, something that arrived in a one-off event and happened to adapt and speciate, or at least evolve into a new species in Hawaii. So we don't really know for sure, but nobody's seen it for donkeys. So the likelihood is it's gone. But because they've kept it up here, even though it's classified as extinct, and because of the way insects work biologically, we cannot be 100% certain. Statistically, we're probably within the range of probabilities that it's gone. Your P equals less than 0.01. So we'd probably say we're 99% sure, but that 1% is still enough that it might, as Gan has suggested, been overlooked somewhere in the Hawaii area. We don't know entirely.
But that depends also on how extensive data has been submitted by how many people doing it regularly.
And also on whether the original habitat is still there. If the habitat's gone, chances are the moth's gone too.
Plant species.
Absolutely the same. And it's just like the big sharia we were talking about last night in the gardens here. No different. It's still there, but it's probably functionally extinct because maybe the pollinator's gone. Or maybe the seed disperser is gone, for example. So that's one of the things you need to be aware of. The other I've talked about is, I hope I have a shortcut for it, otherwise it's a quick search. It's not going to take long. Organisations. No, okay, quick Google time. Come on, get out of it. That one. No. So here you go, CBD, not Central Business District. This is the Convention on Biological Diversity and Sustainable Use of Resources, to give it its fuller title. It's usually simply called the Convention on Biological Diversity, or the Rio Convention, from 1992. All that follows afterwards, in terms of the Conference of Parties to the Convention, guides how every single country and NGO should be trying to conserve, not preserve, to conserve our system called life. The sad part is that even though most countries have signed up to it, very few are doing anything really of note to implement. In paper they may have all the legislation and documentation to say, yeah, we're doing a good job, but actually, most of them don't give a monkeys. There should be a conference of parties somewhere here. But the key thing, there you go. Let me go to this one. Come on, please. So the COP13 takes place very soon, Mexico. And it is basically the 13th update of CBD. The last one was Paris, where we had the Paris Accord on climate change.
It's quite a big one.
Absolutely. And before that, there was the in 2010 Aichi, where they set the 2020 targets for achieving certain goals in biodiversity conservation. And that was a document that should have been utilised in the previous local BSAP to guide where that BSAP is going. We heavily relied on Aichi for the Hong Kong BSAP that was published a year and a half ago now. And that's what this is talking about, the 1,000 days to meet the Aichi 2020 targets. And I think you'll find that no country will meet their targets. The problem, of course, is that politicians are mostly short-term. This is long-term. Politicians will say, yes, that, this, that, and the other. Of course, they just walk away from it and let somebody else carry the can later. But this is something that you guys need to really look at, digest inwardly, think about, and see how you can implement in parallel with the Singapore BSAP. So IUCN is a tool to help measure. CBD is the framework in which we should be operating. And at a local level, that would be the Singapore BSAP. So the last thing I want to show you as the framework is going to be the Singapore BSAP, which should be online. No, not there. Where was it? Google. There we go. And it's hosted on the CBD website. So, there you go. It's there, it's easy, it's available and accessible. And that should be your defining documentation. And it's highly overdue review.
Wow.
So there should be a 2014 one. Well, that's something you can ask them.
Yeah, it should have been
Nobody's looking at it.
short term.
Until the next meeting.
They should, right? If somebody did the first one.
They should be
somebody
continually
should-
working and reviewing. And there should be a publication every 5 years that is written into the BSAPs.
She said 5 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, Lena should know.
Yeah, but she's also under the
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. That's something to put down. So here we go. Guiding principles and goals, strategies, safeguarding, policy issues and decision making. That's across the board. Every department in government should be aware of BSAP and implementing BSAP within their own strategies. Strategy 3, here you go. This is the critical one for you guys, is improving the knowledge of the biodiversity. Public awareness is something you can help with. And then strengthening partnerships with all stakeholders. And where are they tonight?
It's there, but whether it's, you know, implemented.
Maybe. Well, I'll download this anyway,
Very
so we have it.
sensible, yeah.
One of the things that guides the rationale for Singapore, I can write something in, that's not a problem. And then monitoring and evaluation. Now that's not monitoring and evaluation of wildlife, that's monitoring and evaluation of the BSAP. So that's telling government what they should be doing about where BSAP is going. And there should be people channeling their effort and time for that bit, never mind all the rest of it. There's an equivalent one for Hong Kong, which was published in 2016. I'm involved in the review of that. I was involved in the original 2 years of discussions and recommendations from NGO in community stakeholder arrangements from government. So I have some awareness, I would say a full understanding, because that's way above me, but a full awareness at least that there is this process ongoing, and it's governed by CBD, which is a global program. And if Singapore or Hong Kong or any particular signatory is not doing their job, then you should be going straight to CBD and saying, come on, what's happening, please? Why isn't there a new revised BSAP for such and such a place?
The MPAC's website actually I found mentioned about, I think if you look for you go back to we actually have a link to the National Park website that talks about working on a new BSAP.
So they are already committed to do
This one.
But are they linked to the old?
Yeah, that's the one. Our national plan for, okay.
This is dated when?
This is new.
Brand new.
Let's see, we've got a date on it.
Rachel's department.
So it talks about
2014,
14,
Yeah.
3 years ago.
that's when they should have published their review.
Now the 17th.
And they're 3 years behind. So this definitely needs picking up on. Really needs it. Both locally and with CBD
So there is
headquarters.
2009, there was one, right?
Yes.
So it's 2013. so
And it
it's
should be every
5
5 years.
It's 5 years.
Yes.
But they've voted
That
out
says
the
last updated 2014, December.
But there's no report, right?
There's nothing there.
What is the bottom one? The link is that
What is that further down?
action
Yeah.
plan.
It should have a report.
Yeah.
No,
The line below.
that's Rachel's.
The line below.
Yeah, maybe the report is there. Yeah.
2009.
Oh, okay.
Yep,
Somebody-
they need somebody to kick some backsides.
It's not great enough.
Well, that is quite long ago now, it's
Yeah.
like 27.
And this is,
Is there
10 years
a
ago.
person who wrote the report as like,
Oh, 10 years ago.
I'm sure it is by the,
yeah, but the
you
CEO,
won't be there.
that's exactly the same.
no, the long-term names that still around. Probably a politics. That's all.
Let's have a look at the end. Nothing.
It should not be tied to the person's name, belongs to the person lives there.
There's some names there.
Department.
So it just gives the end marks.
No, but there's an email.
No, there's a list of names there.
Generic.
Next up.
Further up.
Yeah.
That's a picture, no.
Picture credit.
Picture.
The guy knows the picture. And this.
But this is not the report, right? This is just a...
No, that's it, that's the B-side.
This is the report.
It's not a report, it's,
It's
yeah,
not.
the report.
It's kind of a report.
Oh.
But it's a guiding document, it should be a guiding document.
But this is 2009. right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's updated.
Very. And I'm sure all the planners and architects and developers are looking at this and saying, ha ha, we've got free license.
Yeah, actually, it's true. Yeah.
That's
I mean, they can
same
even give
parts.
the principles of what they want to do, but
Yeah.
they never
Nobody
flesh it
enforces.
out. And
So you've got the
they never
paperwork, but
enforce.
there's no enforcement.
Yes, no
This is linked to
enforcement.
the real
No use.
Yes,
And if
Yeah.
Singapore has signed up to the...
absolutely, they should
they're
be,
supposed to comply.
yes.
So it's,
And
So
it's-
loose.
To what extent is the enforcement part?
This is the problem.
It's a country level.
Yes.
Fine.
So
It's true.
all the NGOs can do is go back to CBD Secretariat
Mm.
and say, what's happened to the Singapore one for 2014?
What's the report?
We're 2017, come on guys.
But it's a struggle for
The
most countries.
Yes.
CBD secretary, if I may ask, is it under United Nations?
No, it's independent
It's,
of the
it's all
UN.
on its own.
Absolutely.
Oh.
So if you go back to the CBD website, this is exactly the same, by the way, except it's just a little different cover, different formatting.
It's just a...
It's exactly the same document.
It's a lip service document.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Lip service.
Yeah. It's the right word.
It's
Lip
a-
service.
It's doing enough to show.
Yeah.
It's to show
To
that
show
something
that
actually-
something.
It's not quite the same document, it's even briefer.
Yeah.
To follow the...
I mean, like,
pointers or whatever.
and parts normally comes in.
We should ask Rachel
But,
this.
but I'm sure they have, they are doing their bioblades and the things.
Yeah.
They are doing it just that they are not just updating it because they do have nationwide monitoring now by parks.
Yeah,
But they need to be more open.
Yeah, but they are not.
just talking about the Pulau Ubin.
Yeah, that is part of, I think probably part of this.
I think it's part
But
of...
the reports are not published or anything, right?
Yeah.
And, I mean, NSS doesn't get anything concrete
When
from
we were
them.
trying to get deforestation reports.
And we are stakeholders, I mean, NSS is a stakeholder. We don't engage with stakeholders.
Very selective.
Here you have a classic impediment. A lack of communication or a lack of appropriate communication. And people, it may be somewhere in government, somebody's sitting on them saying, don't do it. That is happening in Hong Kong, we know that.
Yes.
They don't tell you that, but we know it's happening. Because the developers
Yeah.
don't want the
Right.
department responsible for looking after the wildlife saying we've got lots of wildlife, because they say, well, if we've got lots of wildlife, we can't build.
Our URA, I think, is quite urban renewal authority, is quite powerful. I think they actually roll out the plan
Yeah.
years ahead.
What's the
So
plan?
once the blueprint is there, they
But
don't want to
That
change.
should be
Yeah.
dovetailing with CBD.
Mm. True.
The master plan should be scrapped if it doesn't dovetail.
Mm.
End of.
Mm.
Of course they won't do that because they all have a job.
Yeah.
Or you can turn it around and say, right, you've got to redo the whole plan, and that'll give them a job for a long time, so they might actually be happy about it. I don't know. But
Don't
that's-
retire.
Yeah.
Keep working.
So there are always positives as well as negatives. And the key thing that NGOs should be good at doing is finding the positive to promote for the benefit of others. Because so many times the NGOs in conservation are perceived as the bad guys stopping everything happening. Whereas we ought to be trying to promote for everybody the benefit of conservation.
It's still the situation.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's-
I mean, NSF have a few stalwarts who have been always championing conservation.
We need a
It's always,
the whole
put
one
down.
to be here.
You know.
Anjong is coming tomorrow. Anjong is coming. Council member.
Yeah.
Is he council member? Yeah.
Oh,
He's
council
attending
member.
the Moth Workshop. Surprisingly.
No.
Well, what I can do, because the moth magic talk is a bit about the rationale of why we do the mothing, I can probably add in an extra slide, putting that into a global and then a regional and a local context of where it is needed from the local level going back, so you work back into the global picture. And I can basically give you the same as I've done now, but in reverse. Saying that what you should be defined by is the end parts BSAP, which in turn looks at how species and habitats are threatened, which you can use the IUCN criteria. And that in turn is all governed by CITES, not CITES, by CBD. Just a couple of one-liners, that's all it needs. That raises the flag. Okay, so they have the website, which is updated in 2014. Now, whenever you see the word balance, take care. There's no such thing as balance. Remember that if there were balance, half of Singapore would be green, with natural primary forest. Is that the case? So developers use the word balance to say, we'd actually like some more to develop. That's what it is.
What's the other way?
There isn't.
They always see balance as
An
still
excuse.
preserving some nature.
As an excuse.
That's what they mean,
Yes.
actually, yeah.
They're calling balance for mitigation.
Yeah. But often nature still is...
Nature loses out.
Yeah, loses
Whichever
out.
way they look
Yeah.
at it,
They
nature
may
loses out.
preserve a little bit.
Well, no, that's the difficult
But it's
thing.
very hard.
People get confused between preservation and conservation.
Okay, how do you...
Preservation is setting something aside in somebody's picture image of how it should be. So you can look at Singapore Bock Gardens as a rainforest from 300 years ago, and if you want to preserve that, you keep it as is. You try and keep the big trees, you try and keep all the canopy, but you may not actually allow the process of ecology to take place. Conservation is allowing something to take place in a site. Not necessarily just one site, but maybe at the landscape scale. So you put Singapore immediately into the Malay Peninsula context. In, let's say, a network of conservation areas that could include Endarompin, Taman Negara, Fraser's Hill, Cameron Highlands, and all the way up to Thailand, for example, with connectivity between each and every one of those components. That is conservation in a more holistic landscape scale. But conservation at the city park scale is connecting the green jigsaw pieces together with corridors. Then at least you allow some functionality. You might have enough of a corridor to allow your seed disperser to fly from A to B. or your pollinator to fly from A to B.
Yeah.
But probably not for mammals to use each component as a viable site. That is what the process is called metapopulation dynamics. And that was first described by Ilka Hansky in the 1990s, using butterflies in Denmark. Because Denmark is a fragmented series of islands, and each island actually has a population, but they were using a metal mark butterfly, Duke of Burgundy for its origin. And they looked at the genetics on each population and how much interbreeding there was between, how much flow, dispersal if you like, from one island to the next, between, or one way, or throughout. So how the flow worked or didn't work, and what the barriers to flow between populations was. Now, those populations may only need one dispersal event to maintain the genetic viability. So if you've got a little bridge that something can jump across once or twice every once in a while, that may be sufficient for the genetic population to maintain itself without inbreeding. But if you haven't got that bridge, whether it be a skyway or a few trees or a hedgerow or a boulevard planted up with the right sources, then bye-bye all populations, because the genetics cannot maintain, because they become inbred and too susceptible to some sort of stochastic event, once in a while, illness, typhoon, fire, habitat loss, that then sets a series of events in motion whereby the whole lot just go bye-bye. Think of the passenger pigeon.
That's really gone.
Long since.
Yeah.
But it was a really, really abundant bird. And it was shot, and then the habitats were cleared. And they went from billions to zero in 2 decades. So these things can happen very, very quickly. You can use that as an example to say, you know, we have to act. You cannot stand by and watch. So yes, balance. No such thing.
How should you rephrase it?
A mitigated view. And it may not be well mitigated. Often isn't.
I'm always very wary of this word mitigate.
Yeah, well, you should
Because
be.
it's always like...
It's in favour of the developer.
Yeah, the developer say, and it's like, you know, we try our best to...
They're not trying their best. They're trying their best to wheedle their way out of their responsibility.
That's right. That is right. I'm not sure.
Sorry, I might sound cynical.
Yeah,
That's the way it is.
but I don't like the word mitigate.
Well, balance
balance
is to be treated in the same group. There's no such thing. Ecology is never balanced. It's always fighting its own corner. Darwin, for goodness sake, looked at it and he said, it's the survival of the fittest. There's no such thing as balance, not even equilibrium. They're all fighting their own corner. We're doing the same as a species. But we're over-fighting our corner. We're too greedy. We have to learn to live with, not fight against. Moths are just one component. We're one component. At the moment, we're a pest of a component on all the other components. But that's the way it is. It shouldn't be like that, because at the moment, the way we're doing it, we aren't going to be here to see much more of it. If you look at soil, we are killing our soils with fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides. We're killing the microbes in the soil. We're not allowing the soil to recover. We're doing the same with our water. We're messing up the water cycle. We're messing up the carbon cycle. We are so overgrazing. Methane going up into the atmosphere is far worse than carbon dioxide. We need to really rethink how we use nature for our own benefit. And that is part of the education in peace out. They've put it there, we need to use it to the benefit of everybody. Now we might not like it, but burying our head in the sand won't help. And that is what people are doing. At government level, at business level, they are carrying on regardless because nobody's really told them you shouldn't be doing it like that. But there are ways to do it. And Singapore in some ways is actually doing well. All the greening on buildings helps. But do you look at Singapore and see wind power, solar power really being used to full effect? No, nowhere. China's actually leading the way, but it's still small fry. So it's difficult. You have to put things into context. The moths is one little component, but you can use them through the education to flag up the bigger issues. Now, Anush said, what's it all for? I hope that gives you some sort of idea. Really, that's what we need to address. The workshop that we'll be running in...
Yes, sorry. Is this about Moth Workshop?
Yes. They're late.
No, I'm checking out.
Just checking out.
They might be end parts with them.
No, that's not this. No, that's a big one. Big one from NParks.
Oh, big.
So if you need a rationale of what you're aiming for, don't just say moth recording. Put it in the bigger picture. Put it within the BSAP framework. They've got the framework, use it. This word balance is to be questioned. Balance for whom? No such thing. Mitigation, yes. But in the context of sustainable use of resources as defined by CBD, not a thing. It's way off the mark. So you have to go back to CBD 1992, look at the goals that they set then. Are they really being implemented? Does the BSAP meet those objectives? If not, then we should be steering the moth recording to start answering those questions. I hope that helps give you some idea of where to head. I can't be more specific in terms of saying what moth recording is for, but you can use it as an educational tool to start help guiding NParks, government, other stakeholders towards understanding what sustainability really is. You've got to aim as high as you can. Set that target as high as you can get away with. And show up the others for how short-sighted they are. I know that sounds terribly highbrow, but I'm afraid if you don't set it high, they will chip away at anything they can get their hands on. So set the mothing recording in that framework. The BSAP, CBD. Use IUCN as a tool to help. And immediately you have the moral high ground, and you can set the target as high as you like, and say this is where we should be heading for the benefit of everybody. And drag them along kicking and screaming if you have to. Because you may. We're having this problem in Hong Kong. We know that this is about sustainable use of resources, and that the stuff we're monitoring is part of that only. And it's for our own benefit.
Hong Kong is not any different from Singapore.
Very little different. It's all greed. Government is all about greed. It's about making sure that people who are in power, through development of buildings and highways and all the engineering projects that they think are good for the benefit of the public and the general people.
Government has built up in Mexico.
We have agriculture, fisheries and conservation, and we have the Environmental Protection Department, both of which are basically kowtowing to the Development Bureau, who look after anything that's development related. And they're sat on by the Bureau, stopped from doing their proper work. Which is extremely conflict of interest, but that's how government run in Hong Kong, and it's probably not that different here. NParks try, but I suspect they'll be sat on by the main
Yeah.
Politburo people here. Okay, I'm going to leave it there because I think that's as much guidance as I can really give in the framework that you need to set yourself up in. That answers partly that question too I put up at the start. Now, iNaturalist comes in later on as a modus operandi that helps you look at IUCN. And nothing more. The area that you need to address is how to manage that data. And I pointed out Darwin Core. That's here. And this gives you all of the criteria that you can use to develop a database that is under an international format that people can talk and exchange information with easily. That is all it's about. Just using the right headings to each column in your table.
Can you show us the two main headings?
Okay, so you have show you, I'll do this slightly different. I'll go to a global biodiversity information facility. You've heard of that? GBIF. That uses Darwin Core compliant data for global coverage of all organisms. So if I do a quick GBIF search, which is probably quicker for me to go here. And if I search for any particular species, let's do something we have here. Daphnis nerei. No, oi. Not on. Try again. Nerei. And we'll call this last thing for this evening. There are 623 occurrences in their data set. So let's have a look. Some with images. And that's where, so from Hawaii right the way through to Western Africa and Northwest Europe. And you should be able to download that data set. So if one looks at these, what's that saying? Species listing, vernacular names. So some are from iNaturalist, some is from the Naturalist Museum, so this is their sources. These are all, so GBIF is a secondary data set. It's pulling in primary data sources, putting them all together, acting in effect as a quality control mechanism. And there's a whole long list there. And somewhere, that data set pulled together is downloadable.
So you'll be able to find your record inside here.
Yep.
So it's linked.
Absolutely.
I do a feed every month. Oh, research grid. So you push into GBIF every month.
Yeah. So let me click 623 occurrences. There you go. That's the whole data set. And whoa, Hong Kong was the very first one. There's another Hong Kong one. And it tells you when, gives you the coordinates, gives you the type of record. You should be able to click every single.
It's a very long list.
There you go. It tells you it's from INAT. Tells the cross-reference, so the original source.
That's only INET, right?
There are plenty of other sources.
Hundreds of sources.
Yeah. So it's a global data set, and it pulls in from all sorts of sources. And here you go. So it's telling you what it all is. It's got an identification, unique identification ID number. And each of these bits and pieces, you can see this in a Darwin Core compliant format. Somewhere. I'm not quite sure where. But for each data set, and it's got everything listed by where it was, and if you download it in Darwin Core format, it will give you the column heads in the Darwin Core format. And that's something that then can be communicated with everybody who uses Darwin Core, and that's now becoming the global standard. So if you're setting up a database here to pool all Singapore's data, please use the same column headings as Darwin Core format. That's really what that's all about. So the data set here.
Hopefully we'll find a name in there as well.
I'm in there somewhere, yes.
Definitely.
No, I
Can
think
will be.
as long as the research going to come inside.
Yeah.
So I can do a search. We do, because there are more GANs than Kendricks. And it's got publication data sets. That's a different one. So it not only has observations of species, it has publication information and data set, natural using data set, all the stuff that goes towards this lot.
But in fact, Roger Kendrick is a different.
If I typed Kendrick, then yes, it will filter out, and maybe I get observations as well. But that gives you an idea of what is available for you to use as a model to set up your own framework, either through NSS or through some modus operandi that is Singapore organization supported. But you will, I recommend, whoever it is that you've got in on this, pull in GBIF as well. Okay, now I'm very conscious it's already 20 past 4. I think we need to make a move, yes. If there are any questions on this, Sunday afternoon will be the time to do it. Does that help?
What's the other one? Yeah. Like we say, this is a kickstart.
It will. It's given you, I think, some of the key pointers, a framework within which you can operate as an independent NGO. It's now going to be up to you to talk to all the other stakeholders, with NParks probably as the chair for now, until something has actually been set up to get the process enacted. And it's the action that really needs to take place once you've got the thing up and running and advertised through NParks, through NSS. The whole thing will, or should, start snowballing. Okay, I need to log off a few things.
A lot more pictures and all that from all over the region, so we should give priority to Singaporeans first, right? Because we have pictures of Thailand more, and different country, India more.